POTUS 4 buckets was physical, mental, family, and spiritual support. How do we build programs to improve the quality of life of our unit members across SOCOM and their families? I learned a ton. I learned like a whole nother level of care that I could apply to myself, not just myself, but everybody I was trying to build programs for. We can figure stuff out at a much lower cost and a much faster rate. If we figure out what works, the regular forces can basically then adopt what we're doing or something very similar, and it's just way more efficient for them.
I'm super excited. Like I said, you went on to do bigger and better things. For 21 years you spent in units that highly specialized as a commando. I've heard you on a couple other shows and use the term commando, so I'll borrow that term. And but I'm so interested in what you're getting to do now. What I'm curious about is how you've borrowed what you learned from your experience in the Army for over 25 years, and how you're kind of applying that to your chosen career field now. So that's kind of like my very first question is you had all of these, you had so many options of what you could be doing for work right now. You could have gone into, personal security, or you could have gone any direction, but you chose to start a business in life coaching. So I'd love to kind of hear about, that business that you've started now and why you chose that over everything else.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess I should say thanks for having me on here, because obviously it's you sharing your audience with me is a big deal. So I appreciate that. Back to kind of how First Principles Performance got started. So I started a company called First Principles Performance in 2018. Let me back up. So like we were talking about, I left 82nd Lurst Detachment in 1999, and I had been selected to go to operator training, the operator training course over at the Special Mission Unit there at Bragg as well. So all of that somehow worked out for me. I joke that they must have lowered the standards there for a short period of time because I snuck in. But the rest of my career was over on kind of that side of Fort Bragg, and obviously after being there a couple of years, the war started. So really, really, perfectly timed career, in my opinion. I had a couple years in the organization, then the war kicked off, and then about 10 years of war back and forth to combat. And then kind of finished out my troop sergeant major time with another group that I was able to lead for a year. So this is 2013 at this point, and we were basically running the wheels off of everyone going downrange to combat or whatever other mission set we had going on. So internally, we were trying to fix it with just hired help with regard to human performance and mental performance and family support opportunities, all of it. And then our higher headquarters, our highest headquarters, SOCOM, said, "Hey, we're gonna dump a bunch of money at this problem," because it wasn't just us; it was everybody in the military, but especially in special operations. Whether you were what would be considered an operator, or you were a direct support guy or an intel guy, everybody was just getting worn out. So they created a program called Preservation of the Force and Family. And for my organization, the leadership said, "Hey, we want one guy or gal to focus on getting as much of that POTUS support as we possibly can." I was probably the right guy to take that role, and they offered it to me. They said, "Hey, you want to be the POTUS director?" And I was like, I have no idea what that is. So after hearing about it, and POTUS 4 buckets was physical, mental, family, and spiritual support. How do we build programs to improve the quality of life of our unit members across SOCOM and their families? And again, I'm a little, I often talk a little tongue in cheek and I was like, well, I was a guy who had been married for over 10 years at that point. So I fit the, hey, I could be the, the family support guy because I still had a wife, and I didn't run away from the psychologist. And I was always the gym geek versus like, the gun lickers that always just rubbed on their guns all day, whether they were at the range or not. I was always the guy who I loved being on the range, but I loved the physical side of training a lot too. So I was always interested in what was going on in the gym or some of our outdoor training areas or the obstacle course or whatever. And then, I was also not afraid of our chaplains and their office. And, I have a strong faith myself. So I was like, they were like, Alex, go get as much of this money as you can. So I put on khakis and a button down shirt and started going down to SOCOM as they stood up this POTF headquarters. And I basically just kind of got in the middle of it as much as I could and just started telling everybody who would give me 5 minutes why I needed more trainers, more mental performance coaches, more of everything, more money. And we did really, really well as that program got started, and we really built out an amazing team. And I did that for the last 3 years of my active duty career, and I learned a ton. I learned like a whole nother level of care that I could apply to myself, and not just myself, but everybody I was trying to build programs for. Because you kind of learn much more about mental health when you're the POTF director sitting in 3 days of meetings, focus on mental health and that kind of stuff. So it was really useful to me. And the other thing I would say that kind of set me up for doing what I'm doing now is I made every mistake you could make, whether it was talking about how you eat versus how you should eat, how you sleep versus how you should sleep. Tons, the thing I probably got closest to right over my 25-year career was the movement thing. I was always very interested in being strong for my size and being able to, like, I never wanted to be the guy that was physically the weak link. But even in that, what I call bucket of performance, I made tons of mistakes and let injuries go untreated for way too long before finally I, hobble into our physical therapist and asked for, hey, I need, what would have probably taken 6 weeks to fix turns into a 6 month, like, hey, it's going to take us a long time to fix this because you're so stupid and that you didn't come in 6 months ago kind of stuff, or ignorant is probably the better word. So, making all the mistakes and then being very invested in performance, or so I thought, and then learning a whole new level of performance, kind of how care and feeding of folks in the POTF director job for my last 3 years was huge. And then I'll tease the next part. And then going to a corporate America job, which I did in 2016 when I retired from the Army, and seeing what happens when you're tied to a desk or a computer, basically kind of immobilized because of the requirements of your job and how that affects people. That was the third leg of the stool that caused me to start building what I thought would be a good POTF-like program for civilians.
So the term POTF isn't one that I'm super familiar with, but the Army has now gone to, the holistic health and fitness. So I'm guessing this was kind of like a predecessor to that, where it's got the 5 domains: physical, mental, spiritual, sleep, and nutrition. So it sounds like you were kind of on the front end of that whole program.
Yeah, for your listeners that don't know as much about the military, so the Special Operations Forces are way smaller in total numbers than the general purpose forces. And a lot of people think special operations means special people. No, it doesn't mean that. It actually means special jobs. Like, there's the military at large that has all of these general requirements that all militaries have. And then there's these little niche requirements that they don't need nearly as many people to be able to do those jobs. So those are special operations. So certain people just tend to be maybe drawn to that kind of mission set, and I was, and so again, I went from an organization that, if you look across all the force structures, is probably more than 1 million people, to Special Operations Command, which is only 70,000, or somewhere in that range, and that includes a ton of civilians. So it's much easier for Special Operations to kind of go, hey, we got a problem in our force. Let's try to figure it out. And one cool thing about how we cross level and cross talk with all of the military, that like all of the Air Force, all of the Army, all of the Marines, Coast Guard, Navy, you name it, is we can figure stuff out at a much lower cost and a much faster rate, and then if we figure out what works, the regular forces can basically then adopt what we're doing or something very similar, and it's just way more efficient for them.
Yeah, I know that they did that with like the Thor 3 program, is basically something they've kind of like stolen from special operations, and are trying to apply that to the broader force now. And I think there's quite a few other examples of that, across the board. I'm super curious though, because like you might be a lot like me because people always ask me, how did you go from being, a ranger to, when I got out of the active duty army, I became a social worker, helping people, solve barriers in their lives. And then I moved to being a strength conditioning coach, and then to a gym owner and kind of like business owner. And people are like, wait a second, these seem like crazy leaps from field to field. But the thing that I always kind of geeked out about with my military service and everything else was, I like to use myself as kind of a lab rat, like try new things on myself and study it. And then I really fell in love with the part of like helping other people to like develop themselves and optimize. Like I got like a real high off of that. And I'm curious, is that kind of what drew you to what you're doing now? I mean, like, what is it about those things that you learned towards the tail end of your career that said, yeah, I still want to keep doing that?
Actually, it's I could care less about the people. It's all about making money now. Just money. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, the corporate America. I had a very interesting opportunity initially, to rebuild a program and I was coming out of the military after 25 years, so it was kind of like, hey, can I be a productive citizen? It was like a huge challenge. What I quickly realized I missed was the community of the military, especially of the organization I spent 17 plus years in. I mean, there were guys that were there when I showed up, and they were at my retirement party as still active members. I mean, one of the cool things about some units, especially when you're enlisted, is if you're able to maintain the standards and do the job, you can literally stay there the rest of your career. So that was like, if you found a place that you loved, of course, it makes sense to do that, right? So I was able to do that. So community is huge for me, and I started missing like that purposeful community thing. And I don't even know if you know this, but I mean, I got deep into CrossFit. I think I went to my first level 1 seminar in Charlotte in 2007. And I mean, it was early enough to where Greg Glassman ran it, Dave, Nicole, everybody was there. I met all the OGs. Then just quickly, CrossFit was always very, very, very supportive of me and anything I wanted to do. I could call up and get in any sold out certification when my timeline lined up. Oh, hey, I want to do Olympic lifting, and I can go at this one, but it's sold out. I'd get an email in an hour. Hey, we got you sorted out. Just this is all you need to tell them when you get there. And I could walk into anything. And they have always been so supportive of the military as a whole. So I fell in love with all of that in the mid 2000s, and I think I'm still I haven't gotten my email that I need to recert, but I'm still a level 2 coach, even though I don't coach in a gym. I just really appreciate the knowledge, and it's been, that's another huge organization from a community and growth standpoint that I can point to in my past that kind of had me where I am today as well. But yeah, like I need a purpose. I need a purpose driven daily opportunity. And corporate America, even in the executive protection or, people security space, just didn't ultimately do it for me.
I'm like half surprised and half not surprised. You had always been someone who was kind of head of the group in terms of I'd say like new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching things. But you always hear people having like CrossFit is somewhat polarizing. So I'm actually really excited to hear that you got into CrossFit because it's actually something that changed my entire life, my entire way of thinking about physical performance and the approach to it. So I'm kind of curious about like what drew you to it, and what do you feel like you learned the most from your experience while doing CrossFit? And I think you're still doing it to some extent.
Yeah. So funny story. I had broken my finger out on an operation, and so I had that big metal like wrap thing on it for a couple days, and they were like, you're just chill out. You're not doing anything. I picked up a magazine. I think it was a Men's Health. It was the first time I had seen an article about CrossFit, and it was like, hey, if you want a taste of it, go do 15. I think the challenge was 15 minutes. It may have been 12 minutes. And it was like 3 pull-ups, 6 push-ups, 9 air squats. Just repeat that as many times as you can for 12 minutes. It maybe was 15 minutes. The 12 or 15 minutes doesn't matter because when I read that, I'm like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. And then 4 minutes in, completely gassed, I was like, what in the world is going on? What is this voodoo?
Yeah.
And that was kind of, man, it all started right there. You know what I mean? So here we are talking about it 20, well, not quite 20 years later, 17-ish, maybe 18-ish, like from the time I did that first workout. And yeah, I'm just a big fan. And I pretty much for a while, well, I mean, self-taught, so I'm doing everything wrong. We didn't have strength coaches at the time in our gym, so I'm doing squats. My form is horrible. Deadlifts, form's horrible. I'm making huge gains. I went from bench pressing twice a week to bench pressing hardly ever. And my bench went up like 20 pounds one day. I just jumped on it because a buddy was asking me to spot him. I'm like, let me see if I can do that. And I went from like, was never great at bench, 235 and I pushed 255 that day, just completely wondering what the heck's going on. Of course, now I know. And I talk to people all the time about the power of the squat. And I can actually do decent squats now, considering my age and injuries. So just saw amazing improvement. Then went to my first certification and literally was in the middle of the circle every class as the guy doing stuff wrong. Oh, hey, Alex, come on out here. So I'm going to show you what, okay, Alex, go ahead and go through that air squat for us. Okay, notice how he starts with the muted hips. And I'm just like, muted hips? What are you talking about? Needless to say, everything was wrong and I was still making amazing gains. So I kind of dove in. I worked with Bergner. I worked with Ripito multiple times. Obviously just absorbing and learning as much as I could. And then I could coach people at work on the right way to do a squat and the right way to train as far as resistance training and constantly varied, like CrossFit, but mostly a lot of people just wanted to know how to do movements properly. So I could teach a proper back squat. I could teach a proper front squat. Even on occasion when guys got good, with very light weight, I could teach a proper overhead squat and all the things that came along with that. And then operationally, I just felt I was already kind of considered a fit guy, but like I just had no issues with anything we did in combat. And I was doing main page workouts for the most part. I did my own running and we had an amazing we had a no course on the compound that we were free. It was free for us to use whenever we wanted, as long as we had somebody with us. And I kind of called that my sanctuary, because I'd just go down there and buzz through that thing, and it fit into the CrossFit kind of multimodality types of training very well. But yeah, mostly just doing main sites and having no issues with anything I did in training or combat.